candle of joy. And although Advent can be a somber season of preparation, the text I had planned to preach this morning was from the first chapter of Luke, a passage we've come to know more commonly as the Magnificat, Mary's song of joy in having been chosen by God to bear the Christ child. However, in light of what happened Friday in Newtown, Connecticut, and because I think my home heart is so heavy because of those events, that joy seemed somewhat misplaced. So I've changed course a bit, and I want to focus this morning a little bit on what happened, but more particularly I want to talk about what our response as a people of faith might be. Advent is a season of anticipation and hope. Over the course of 4 weeks, we speak of hope, peace, joy, and next week, love. In lighting the Advent candles each week, we find ourselves invited into God's vision of shalom, or peace and wholeness for all of God's creation. And we wait upon fulfillment of hope that God will one day inhabit our world fully and make things right. Friday's events, however, remind us that there is still much brokenness in our world. We are not yet where God has called us to be. There is great need for God's healing grace to be made visible. And as Christians, we are invited to participate in that healing work. We're still learning what really happened. What we do know is that a young man, Adam Lanza, 20 years old, entered an elementary school and shot and killed 20 children, along with the principal, council, teachers, and other staff. In the end, he shot himself, much like another 20-year-old man in suburban Portland, just a few days before. And we know that before he ever went to Sandy Hook Elementary that day, he shot his mother. It's too early to tell exactly all that happened or to know the reasons why. But questions will be raised, and I think should be raised, about this young man's mental health and his access to these particular guns, which, by the way, were apparently owned by his mom. So without trying to politicize the conversation, because I don't want to do that at all, and I don't want to go there, what I do want to suggest that as a nation, we have to sit down and have a common sense conversation that covers topics such as access to guns. Not taking guns away from hunters, but access to guns. And the fact that we as a nation seem to idolize guns and violence in general. And we have to have a conversation about the reality of mental illness. Each time something like this happens, we invariably find out that the person, the perpetrator, suffered some kind of mental illness. Yet we as a country have not done much to take care of those issues. We have to have a conversation about our inability, it seems, to provide adequate mental health care. And the stigma that we attach to mental health that makes people unlikely to get help. And the resources that are not there. But again, that's for another time and another place, and I don't want to focus on that this morning. I just want to say that we have to have a common sense, nonpartisan conversation where the extremes shut up and we somehow find a middle ground where we address what are very complex issues in our nation. Our nation, more than any other developed nation in our world, has this problem. What is it about us that makes this happen again and again and again? But again, that's for another day. Today I want to focus on what our faith teaches us about these unspeakable tragedies and about how we as Christians should respond. First of all, and I don't think I need to say this to you because I think I've said it to you enough today, but just in case, I don't believe for a moment that God wanted this or God willed this to happen. People say that, well, it must have been God's will. We don't understand, but surely this is what God willed, or it wouldn't have happened. People say that because they don't know what else to say. But that's not the God we know, is it? People say that because they mistakenly believe that God is in control of everything that happens in our world. But we're not puppets, are we? The Bible teaches us that we are a people of free will, that God created the world and set in place laws of nature and other laws that God gave us. And that we have the will, the free will, the freedom to follow those or not. We may never know what caused this young man to do what he did. Mental illness probably played a role. Anger, perhaps, rage, evil. But one thing I do believe more than anything, that it was not God. Friday morning, about the time this horrific event was taking place, Crystal and I were with Hunter at his preschool, participating in a Christmas family sing-along. Afterwards, we ran some errands for the church and then stopped for lunch. Just as we were stopping, I got a breaking news alert from the New York Times on my iPhone about what had happened. And so I immediately went to Facebook and started reading what was known at that time. And as I sit there waiting to order my lunch, I just cried. My heart was broken for this community, this children, this family. And I stopped and think, if my heart broke the way it did, and I did not know these people, how much more so was God's heart broken on Friday by what transpired? No, God did not will this or want this, no matter what worldly people may say. Nor was God absent in the midst of this. And that's the second thing I want to address. It seems to me like any time tragedy strikes, there are those who are quick to blame what happens on our lack of faith, on the fact that we have taken God out of schools and other public places. And of course, true to form, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee steps up to the plate and does just that. On Fox News, he said, "We ask why there is violence in our schools, but we have systematically removed God from our schools. Should we be so surprised that schools become a place of carnage?" Really, Mike? Folks, that's not good theology. That didn't happen because we don't pray in school. You know, I was thinking we were singing the song, Go Tell It on the Mountain, and how things have changed. When I was in elementary school, we sang and learned that song in school. But folks, we are not a homogeneous society anymore. When I went to school, we were probably all Christians. I certainly don't think I went to elementary school with Muslims or Hindus or Sikhs or Jews. So we could do that, but we don't live in a homogeneous society anymore. So we can't have organized, school-sponsored prayer in school anymore. But that doesn't mean that God is not in the schools. There are organizations in almost every school I know where students voluntarily gather for times of prayer and faith, whatever their faith tradition may be. So to say that it happened because we've taken God out of school, I'm sorry, that is just ludicrous. And it is bad, bad theology by Huckabee. Because that way of thinking makes God out to be some kind of small, angry, petulant God who would arbitrarily strike out and punish innocent children simply because we don't pay enough attention to them. That's not the God I believe in. That's not the God I've come to know in Jesus the Christ. Christmas reminds us that God came into the world as a human being, a particular human being, at a particular moment in history, a moment chosen by God. And God, through Christ, brought a message that God loves us, that God wants a relationship with us, and that God is always present with us. Yet I know that when a tragedy like this unfolds, the question is inevitably raised. Where is God? Where was God Friday morning? Author John Stroman recalls getting news of the devastating earthquake in Haiti in 2010. A New York Times report described a Haitian pastor standing amid the rubble of his church and reassuring his listeners. I know it seems like God is hiding, but he's here, he said. He's always here. And isn't that the good news we celebrate at Christmas? The good news of the incarnation? The joy of what happens in Jesus the Christ? God became one of us, one with us. That's what Emmanuel means, one with us. That we might never have to face these kinds of tragedies alone. I believe with the psalmist that God will heal the brokenhearted, and God will bind up their wounds. But where were we at? Where was God at St. That's right. Was God there at all? Yes. Definitely, God was there. God was there in the brave actions of that principal, Don Huxford, and the counselor, Mary Sherlock, who lost their lives as they lunged at an armed gunman, trying to prevent what happened. He was there in teachers like Victoria Soto, who hid the kids in a bathroom in a closet and then lost her life taking care of them. And then Lauren Russo and Emery Murphy and Rachel DeVito, who gave their lives hiding and shielding their children. God was present. Do not be mistaken. The story, God was present in the first responders who went in without any regard for their own safety, not knowing where the gunman was or if he was still shooting. They just went. God was there. Their stories will begin to be told over the next few days and weeks. Stories of compassion and care for the people brought low by grief and anguish. God was there, and the people of that community who were quick to respond. God was there in a nation who wrapped that community in its prayers. Was God there on Friday? Oh yes, God was there in the school. You can't take God out of school. We find God in the love and outreach of all who act to bring comfort and companionship to those who are hurting and after that. Just like we did with Hurricane Sandy. When people respond, that is where we find God incarnate in our world. Yes, there's much darkness in our world, but our faith assures us that even in the darkness of such unspeakable tragedy, the darkness of such a twisted mind, the darkness cannot ultimately overcome the light of God's love in Jesus Christ. At Christmas, we read again the beginning of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. There's a quote by the late Presbyterian minister Fred Rogers that's been making rounds. We know him better as Mr. Rogers. Fred Rogers said, "When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. To this day, and especially in times of disaster, he continued, I remember my mother's words, and I am always comforted by realizing that there were still so many helpers, so many caring people in this world. I would add to that, so many points of light in a world that often seems so dark. Where was God? God was in His presence, always, as we embody Christ in our lives, our actions, our responses. Maybe that's where we find our joy this Advent, even in the midst of something so horrendous. You know, I truly believe and trust that God is with us always. No matter what, I tell you this all the time. No matter what circumstances life brings our way, and God was and is with those people. Yet even as I express my trust in God, I recognize that there is a desire. We have this innate desire to find answers for questions plaguing our hearts. I'm not going to pretend I have the answers. But the only way I can experience joy in this moment of tragedy is to know in my heart that God is walking in the midst of this world and you are hurting this moment. So in the midst of our hurt, and yes, our anger, may we all find a place of joy, always and forever. In closing, I'd like to share with you a prayer for the Connecticut elementary shooting. I found at a site called the Garden. It's a beautiful prayer. Let's really pray it with you. Good and gracious God, we are reminded that we live in a broken world. We are reminded of how fragile life really is. Some will surely say, where is your God? And it's easy to echo their question. Remind us that you did not cause this tragedy or any other. Remind us that you suffer with those who suffer. You reach out and offer them a loving embrace of comfort. You call on your people to do the same. While we know in our hearts that this tragedy was senseless, we also know that you have a beautiful way of pulling meaning out of the senseless in order to help us move forward and grow closer to you. So for this moment, we hold in our hearts the children and the teachers killed, the families who now grieve, and yes, even the shooting. And even as we remember them, we give thanks for the knowledge that you love each of them and have invited them into your presence. Once we have grieved this tragedy, turn our minds toward the problem of violence in this world. Help us to bracket out political perspectives and the monetary call of big business, and focus our hearts and minds on the love of your creation, the love of our neighbor. May the way we move forward honor the lives that have been lost.